welcome to ManchTalk. I'm Tammy Simmons.
And I'm Carla Garrick.
And we're still at home. We could go into the studio. It's not like we can't. I think we've kind of got spoiled by being able to just jump in and do it and then jump out. But Carla and I usually go and get coffee afterwards, and this is just the first week where restaurants will be able to be open, and who knows which ones are actually going to be open. I know tomorrow night I'm going out to dinner at Murphy's, so I'm excited about that. We've been taking
that would be MRC?
That would be for the Manchester GOP meeting. We reserved 2 tables of 6, and then we'll do the Zoom thing also somehow.
Okay.
So people can stay and watch at home, or they can, well, now our tables are full, so whatever. But I'm excited. I'm wanting to help some of my favorite restaurants. Murphy's had closed completely. Takeout just wasn't enough. I think what people are underestimating is the problems with supplies. Restaurant, I know Casey's Rib Shack's closed because they were, not only because of the restrictions and not being able to, have diners, but he was really having a hard time getting the food that he normally serves. And there is a catch-22 there, because you could substitute something else, but if your quality isn't as good as what people expect, when you are back open, do people stop coming because they weren't happy with the quality, in between? I know Murphy's has a limited menu from what I understand, which makes sense. But things people have to remember. I think sometimes people just don't think. This isn't, when you go someplace, remember that it's not easy for the cashier or the server or anybody. If it's a pain in the butt for us as consumers, it's equally a pain in the butt for those businesses that are attempting to reopen and get back to business. And
I sadly think that we made the wrong mistake from the start, and now we also have these task forces, which I would say are designed to try and make the state save face. And I don't think it's the right approach. I mean, I was looking at, guidelines for the restaurants. If someone could please explain to me the actual scientific logic behind saying, well, 6 people can sit at a table together, but that 6-person table has to be 6 feet from the other table that has 6 people at it, then I will tell you that is not scientific, and now we are just making stuff up to make it seem like we know what we're doing.
The 6 people at the table, I mean, I'm not saying this isn't a defense thing, but that's an interesting one, because I was questioning this morning the 6-foot thing. If we just assume or presume or whatever.
I don't know where the 6-foot thing came from.
But even if 6 foot is a legitimate number, which we, whatever, let's just play along and say 6 foot is the safe thing.
I'm tired of playing along.
I know,
Tammy,
but I'm just saying there's still inconsistencies even with the 6 foot. Now we could say Dan and I can eat at a table because we live in the same house together, or a family of 6 or whatever could eat together at a table. Okay, so that's one thing. But then I'm looking at, I browsed through yesterday's releases, one was outdoor attractions. So shooting ranges, golf, whatever it's called, driving range, fishing, small fishing boat, fishing tour things, just a bunch of different outdoor things, not amusement parks necessarily, but miniature golf, things like that. So I was looking at that. If there's seating outdoors, not for dining, just seating, it has to be 10 feet away from the next one. And I'm like, wait, where'd the 10-foot number come from? And why do campgrounds have to have only 50% occupancy if 6 feet away at the restaurant is okay and 10 feet outdoor? I would rather see the government, if we're going to put out guidelines, I'd rather put out guidelines that say, people should try to maintain a 6-foot distance from, people that they're not normally in contact with. If you're unsure, blah, blah, if you're vulnerable or you want to, whatever, wear a mask, blah, blah. But I don't
Do you
see
see that there's this huge push now from the left? I saw there were several letters to the editor in the paper today, yesterday, before that, including Comrade Valinsky, who was calling for mandatory masks. And, that is something I think that will create a vast resistance.
Yes.
Within certain groups of people.
I just think regular people. I like to observe. I'll be honest, and I don't know if there's not necessarily a good reason, a bad reason. So I'll throw a mask on. I have one that I throw around my neck, just in case somebody with a mask is more like if I'm in a store. But I will wear the mask in Walmart, probably because Walmart skeeves me out in general. Walmart or the grocery store, whatever. But generally, I'm not wearing a mask anymore. I went to the garden center yesterday. They required that you wore the masks in the greenhouse. So I did, because that's their business, their restrictions, fine. But when I ordered my ice cream at the ice cream stand, I didn't have a mask on. And I observe other people who do and don't have masks on. And I don't think, it seems to be a wide spectrum on both sides. It's not just, I see a lot of older people who probably are in the more vulnerable category who aren't wearing masks. So,
but they're also,
I'm really kind of starting to go, I don't know. I think we have to, this is my gut. I think the information we had early on in March and the decisions that were made in March, which we can't go back, you can't ever go back and undo what you learned. It was what it was, and I'm not sure that the decisions made in March were incorrect. However, I think science and data is showing that the information we had in March going into April has changed now that we're in May going into June. And I think we need to scale it all back.
So shifting gears, because we're
let's talk about something fun.
Not going to agree on this.
I know we're not.
We had a very exciting event happen last week. My husband was coming back from walking the dog, I believe, or somewhere, and I saw him run by the living room windows, and I was kind of like, where is he running to? So I opened the garage door, and actually he was coming in to grab shovels. And I was like, what's going on? And he's like, there's a fire at our neighbor's house. And he had seen the smoke. And so we ended up, I was like, okay, I'll grab the fire extinguishers. I'll meet you there, right? Now we live right behind Gosler Park School. So there's a steep hill that comes up the back, and our fences are on the back of the top of the hill. There's a lot of debris and dry brush and all that kind of stuff behind the fence. Now we have in years past, actually, when we bought the house and we moved in, our neighbors across the street were like, you should keep an eye out because the little kids from the school sometimes set fires back there. I'm like, okay, fine, whatever. We did have a couple, maybe over 4 years, but the school's closed, all of that. So this wasn't a little middling fire. This was actually a legitimate brush fire. There was black smoke. When I got there, I had 2 fire extinguishers from our house. Louis had some shovels, so he was shoveling sand. One of the neighbors next door had the sprinkler over the fence, and he was kind of sprinkling water. There were 2 little kids. I am not going to say whether they did or do not start the fire. They claimed they didn't. They kept yelling, we didn't do it. We just saw the smoke. So all this drama is going on. And I was actually running between their house and my house because I wanted to get 5-gallon jugs of water because the sprinkler, it didn't have a very high force. It wasn't really helping at all. Louis had the shovels. The little boy had taken one of the fire extinguishers from me. I was getting the other fire extinguishers and these jugs of water. So I'm running back to their house. I had actually, how we are during the day, we have our sort of housewear, I call them my day pajamas, sweats kind of, and I was cooking, so I had my apron on. when he called me initially, Louis did, I was like, I'm just going to grab my gun. I typically will open carry, especially right now because of, you know, the situation we're in. So I sort of grabbed my belt and I had that on. So I had my apron and my Mickey Mouse pajamas and my gun, and it was like very exciting. And as I was running back to the house, unmarked police vehicle had shown up, and there were two undercover officers. You know, they weren't in uniform. And the officers got out and they're like, what's going on? And I'm like, there's a fire on Gosler Park. And the police officer just starts walking onto my neighbor's property. And I was like, excuse me, I don't think he would want that. I think you need to ring the doorbell. At that time, I didn't even know my neighbor wasn't home, right? So we're just like kind of dealing with the situation. And I said, I think you should, you know, call it in and then go around to the school side to come up from that end, right? Because we
where
weren't
the fire
on,
actually is.
yeah, we weren't on, it wasn't on anyone's property. It was on the school's property. So the officer just flat out ignored me initially and actually walked to behind the house. And I was like, excuse me, I don't think you should do that. I don't think, you know, you need to get the property owner's permission, I think is how I said it. And he looks at me and he goes, why? Does he have a gun? Which I just thought was such an unusual question. I ignored that and I was like, I don't really have time right now. You know, so I just, you know, I went back and we were fighting the fire. The fire truck showed up. They came up the hill from the back. By this stage, most of the fire was out. It was pretty exciting. It was pretty scary. But basically, you know, 3 non-essential neighbors took care of something before 13 essential first responders showed up. And that is as bitter. If it sounds as bitter as it sounds, it is as bitter as it is. So I was talking to one of the officers afterwards, and he was in uniform. He actually had a face mask on, but we were standing at the back gate. And, you know, it was an adrenaline-fueled kind of situation. And I was, you know, recounting something, and I swore. And when I swore, something must have beeped or something must have happened because he immediately said, oh, I need to let you know I'm audio and video recording you. And I was like, yes, you are, because, you know, I've done so much work on open and transparent government. And we know, and there's lots of studies that show that when officers wear body cams, it keeps everyone safer. In states where they've introduced it, you've seen a drop in use of force down to 80%.
Yeah.
So it's really a tool, I think, that, you know, I thought would keep both sides.
It's a good thing on all ends of the spectrum.
Yeah, you know, and more transparency, I think, is something that, you know, will help all of us. And especially when we're in this situation where the state, first of all, is claiming that they now own you and can tell you what to do with your life for 24 hours a day. They are also putting in this grid to surveil us that we know about, right? So we have the cell phone towers. They're now doing the contact tracing. There's the cameras and the surveillance cameras down.
Contact tracing. I'm just going to call that stalking.
Yeah, no, it's a ridiculous, and no one should consent to it. But as you know, the officer and I were talking. He, you know, he said, oh, well, you know, this is recording. And so when I got home, I was like, oh, that's actually kind of cool. I want the footage from this exciting thing. I don't know, I could put it in a Senate ad or something, you know, that's the kind of neighbors you want, people who help you. And so I filed a 91A. I sent it to the police office, you know, the police department. I could not find any contact information for Chief Capano, so I used their online forum, but then I also called the chief, got his admin, and left a courtesy message saying, I filed this, I want to make sure you guys know so that we don't get into this tailspin where they don't do it in time, and now it's a drama and all of that. So I get this email back from them, and they're like, oh, no. All footage, all body-worn camera footage in New Hampshire is exempt from our right to know laws. And I'm like, I don't think there's one other state in the nation that is the case. And 2, I think that it's a ridiculous travesty and we need to fix that. So the language is actually, it's like an exception to an exception to an exception that they like shoved in with some kind of legalese. But, you know, if anyone who feels that like open, transparent government and footage when you're interacting with a police officer, of course, like I waived my right to privacy there.
Exactly.
I was like, I don't care.
As long as I would think as long as the private citizens that are in the footage, so in this case, you or your neighbor or whatever, waive their, their privacy. I don't understand why we can't see the footage.
Well, that also is, I mean, it's equally like on the job, on the record, which was what my lawsuit back in 2010 was about. Well, 2010 is when I got arrested, but 2014 is when we had the First Circuit case. The First Circuit's right under the Supreme Court, and that 3-panel of appeals judges said, of course you have the right to record police officers executing their public duties.
Right.
And so I've always encouraged people to film police because we have the tools, but I was actually really excited to be like, oh, I'm a taxpayer. Now, if they're wearing these cameras that I paid for, then if I want to get the footage, then I should be able to get the footage. But apparently that is now not the case. So when I become senator, that is something I would like to work on, because I do think that.
Go ahead. Sorry.
No, I was just going to say, I do think that, this literally isn't like this anywhere else. And so this is shenanigans and unethical, and I'm going to go figure out who did what. And I will let you guys know, because, it shouldn't be this way.
It'd be interesting. You could go to the RSA probably and backtrack and figure out who put the legislation in and how it got there and who was the sponsor. Because sometimes, I'm not defending that particular RSA or that particular language, but sometimes what does happen is the legislative process is not the best. But we have, there'll be these 30 words strung together, and then somebody's intention is to change, whatever problem A is. And so they string these 30 words onto those 30 words. And next thing you know, when you read it as a whole, it no longer fixes problem A, it creates problem B.
But Tammy, we're also, we have so many words on pages now that
many words.
Literally no one knows what the laws of the land are.
Yep.
I was reading some of these task force, I don't know, words on a page, because I'm like, can someone explain to me what the legal, so all of these things are unconstitutional. We know that for a fact. And I will tell you how we know that, because besides that, our Attorney General of the federal government said so, and besides the fact that they are not actually arresting anyone for being outside or for doing anything, what they are doing is they're pulling your business licenses, your occupational licenses, your liquor licenses. So the entire regulatory body of the state is now being used, because they know they don't have a constitutional foot to stand on, leg to stand on. And so we're seeing, so there are all these words on the pages, and I actually went and looked at some of these task force recommendations, and I had to say, I stopped cold when I saw there was a defined term for universal health guidelines for all New Hampshire employers and employees. All caps, which means that's a defined term somewhere, which now tells you all these new cleaning things and regulatory things that you're supposed to do. And my question to you and my question to our viewers is, on whose authority? Who is passing these laws? Our legislature isn't in session. We now have His Excellency Sununu setting things up. There are no checks and balances. This task force was not elected. I don't know who these people are or why we should be listening to them. So, we've had a massive, massive breakdown of civil society. There is no rule of law. If someone could show me how this is at all not arbitrary and nonsense, to go back to my word from earlier, I'm happy to listen. But honestly, I am not impressed.
On a similar note, not to change the subject slightly, but just so you know, I forgot to hit start on the timer. So we're winging it. I'll watch my camera. I think when I think we're at 30 minutes, I'll stop us. Speaking of the legislature and silliness, or craziness, I guess it's really not silly because it's a lot of money. So the legislature is going to reconvene. The Senate, which is 24 members, will meet in the 400 seat House of Reps Hall, and the reps, the 400 member reps will meet at UNH Whittemore Center in Durham. I'm okay with that being the location. What is crazy is that the Democratic speaker, Shurtleff, wants to spend $200,000 to outfit the Whittemore Center with electronic voting capabilities. This is just crazy. I mean, what are we talking? How much legislation could possibly be there that couldn't just be simply tabled? To be honest, they could go in one day, take everything and say table, or whatever, and just push it off to next year. If it's not critical legislation for what, maybe there's a handful of pieces of legislation that actually have to get voted on with a roll call vote, mind you, because voice votes can still happen without any new any added technology. So $200,000. Now, granted, this is all money from the CARES Act, because CARES Act went from the federal government to the state, and then the state is giving it to whatever.
Oh no, they're wasting it.
$200,000.
Really, they can't just write on a piece of paper, take 400 pieces of paper, take 15 minutes, figure it out,
they can call the roll. I mean, that's what we did. There's been times when I was a legislator, when the system went down and there's a roll call, they literally call the roll. Is it tedious? Yes. So maybe not have roll calls on some of this stuff that's just nonsense. Just table most of it. Well, so that my first thought was like, what the Democrats just, I mean, we have a lot of chaos going on as it is, a lot of stupidity going on as it is, but to add insult to injury, let's spend $200,000 of taxpayer money, whether we think we should have it or not, on something that has no lasting effect for the people of New Hampshire. That's insane. The other interesting little tidbit that I saw today is that Shaker Regional High School, which is somewhere up in the Lakes region, because their schools were closed, and because if the schools are closed, there's certain things that just don't cost money anymore, they realized a savings of $850,000 just in this little tiny regional school district because of the schools being closed. So the town of Belmont is giving the money back to the taxpayers. What a stinking concept. Now, that begs me to ask, if a little tiny school district is realizing an $850,000 savings, certainly a district the size of Manchester's would have to be realizing significantly more than that. And if that's the case, why can anybody with a straight face tell me that Manchester needs to increase its school budget by millions of dollars when other communities are actually giving the money back to the taxpayers?
Oh, and not only that, I believe, tomorrow there's going to be a vote to remove Mayor Craig off the school board. This is part of the motion that was put in when the Manchester Proud created this entirely private consortium that is now, putting together all our policy in this city. And they are going forward with creating their own taxing authority, which means the last I heard, we're going to have, a 15% increase actually in our school costs. But get this, I read an article this week that said, even though other places its transportation costs have gone down, in Manchester, I believe it was in Manchester, they're now projecting it's going to triple because they're going to buy new school buses to socially distance the children on the buses. Here's my recommendation to New Hampshire. Let's keep the schools closed till 2030. I would fully support that.
Well, and how about this? If it's transportation, so if they're worried about social distancing, how about this? How about parents just bring their kids to school?
Well, how about we just, break this ridiculous 150-year-old model monopoly,
that too.
And let's get back to, I think that the thing that people don't want to talk about, which is the real conversation, is do people actually care about the schooling and the education, or are they just really happy for free daycare? Now, lest we forget, maybe people back home don't know this, so they should know this. daycare was not closed for essential workers' children. So there's this very, very dangerous thing that is so dangerous that we have to lock up everyone and tell them they're non-essential. But we don't really think it's that dangerous because we're just going to continue business as usual, pay ourselves more money, and we get our daycare. So I think part of the conversation about the education model should be, well, do you really, like, if the function of school, which it seems to have become, isn't truly to educate anyone because children cannot read or write when they get out of it, then maybe we should just admit that most of it is actually just daycare. And so I'm hoping there'll be a pivot where some people will say, actually, this homeschooling experience was kind of great for our family for whatever reason, but for other families, it is 100% not working, right? A lot of times parents who both work from home. I talk to other friends actually out in California. They have 5-year-old twin boys in 1,000-foot ranch house that's on a mountain, so no yard. And they were like, oh my goodness, we can't wait for the kids to go back. So it's not working for everyone. But the thing is, maybe we start to look at it more from a daycare model stuff, which would certainly at a minimum cut costs.
Yep. I know.
I'm tired of paying all this money for things where, like, we're not getting the services. I actually asked those firefighters when they were leaving, and once again, the fire was kind of out. There was a little bit going down the hill, and I do think there was a truck on the other side. So I'm not sure about that. If I could have gotten the footage, maybe we could have pieced it together. But, I actually said to one of the fighters, I said, wow, I just used all 3 of my home's fire extinguishers, right? Proper preparation prevents poor performance. So I had the right tools in order to do something in a dangerous situation. But I was like, hey, do you guys give like free extinguishers away? Because aren't we just giving free stuff away to everyone now? I have not seen a red cent. I haven't gotten one check. I haven't claimed unemployment. I didn't get the Trump check. I am just one of those people where everyone's like, you're not essential, Carla, but keep paying your taxes and put out some fires from time to time, and we won't help you with that either.
Isn't it fun? Not really.
No, it's very frustrating. And the frustrating part is everyone's buying into this. And if you're a person who is speaking the truth and you're a person who's saying what is happening is not right, taking away our liberties and then actually leaning into it, right? So you said earlier, you think the right decision was made back then. I disagree. I think we could have done everything as the advisory, but still stringently recommended to people, this is how we want you to behave. And I can assure you, had Sununu done that, I would have tried my best to make sure that people I interact with are actually trying to do the right thing. The minute there was an order that says, you have to do this stuff, you're creating a chain of enforcement. The problem is you can't say these are new laws and then not expect the people who enforce the law to start doing it. So we're actually seeing neighbors ratting out neighbors. That's an awful, awful thing. Anyone who picks up the phone to say that parents who have their children outside who are playing, you're a bad person. You're not doing anyone any favors. You have no right and no claim to those people's lives. Everyone in a free society has to decide for themselves what the best decision for them is. And this idea of this collectivism where suddenly it's for the greater good. But if the greater good is bad for me, so if the greater good is bad for me, whose good is it? And who's the greater person to decide?
I'm watching the clock. I think we have to wrap up because I failed to click timer. So it's going to be like in the 80s. Like if you have an air conditioner, this is the week I guess we have to put it in. Suddenly summer. The temperatures will go back down, but I think Friday is going to be like 85 degrees or something. I don't know. I looked at the 10-day. There's no rain in the forecast for the next 10 days. There's going to be many, many days where it's going to be close to 80 or in the 80s. So, get out your summer shoes and make sure your toes don't look really gross. Can't go get a pedicure yet, but I did it myself, so I've got a really bad pedicure.
Oh my goodness, I had my hair cut yesterday. I mean, it kind of looks the same because my bangs were so short. But, you know, I mean, I have a photo which I'm too scared to share because I don't want because, I mean, she leaned over my shoulder and we took a little selfie, right? But I was like, that's not 6 feet. Now I'm sure it's okay. We both had masks on, the whole, you know, security, theater, compliance. There was a posted notice on their door that would have shamed any communist country. It was like 4 feet big of words just telling you how to like clean things. It's ridiculous and it has to stop and people must start to disobey.
Okay. That's all we got. We have to go on with living our little lives again. And we'll be back next week.
I think the lockdowns are good for people who believe in liberty in New Hampshire. Our lives are changing, and we're all having an actual really fantastic time.
And we hope you're having a good time too. At least we're hoping that you're surviving. We'll be back next week. If you have any questions, have any suggestions, have any negative feedback, whatever you got, you can send them to us via email at manchtalk@gmail.com. Until then, that's all we've got. Bye, guys.
Bye.